Um, so last time we, in the Sermon on the Mount, we were in Matthew on the topic of lust, and primarily what that means to Jesus and what it meant for the Israelites at the time. And Jesus had a completely different idea of what lust was compared to what the people thought. So once he dealt with that topic and sort of laid out the themes of his teaching on that topic, it then goes on from lust to divorce. And we'll pick up in Matthew chapter 5, verse 31. And it says, "It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." So before we just jump into a discussion, I just want to lay down the context in which Jesus is speaking on. If you go to Matthew chapter 19, at the very beginning of the chapter, Jesus is confronted by the Pharisees, and they ask him a question regarding divorce. So on the Sermon on the Mount, he's addressing his disciples and the people about divorce. But then the Pharisees come and they directly ask Jesus what he thinks about divorce. And I'll just go ahead and read just a little bit of it first, starting with verse 1. "Now when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea and beyond the Jordan, and large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, 'Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?'" So, if you look at that statement and you look at what Jesus says, he's going to say it again, of course, but what the Pharisees are asking, they're directly referencing Deuteronomy 24:1. So, just to read what the law says regarding divorce, it says, "When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house." So, during the time of Jesus, there has been a huge controversy surrounding divorce. And during that time, people have referenced this particular verse and just what it means. And there was this huge debate. On one side, you have the school of rabbis who were a bit more liberal than others that said, when they read this verse, whenever it says he has found some indecency in her, what they say is, well, that could be anything from, him not liking her looking at another man in public, him not liking her being disrespectful to his parents, him not liking her wearing her hair down, him not liking her because she prepared him a mediocre meal, whatever. That rabbi school says that then the man has the right to write a certificate of divorce and send her away for any cause that he finds not fulfilling him, or in this case, some indecency. So that's one view of. And this is during the time of Jesus, so this isn't just in our time, but that's that side. On the other side, there's a more conservative school of rabbis who say that the indecency was strictly adultery, that the only reason to write a certificate of divorce is if the wife had committed adultery, and that's it, just adultery. It's not, and it's, that's it. No, any other type of sexual immorality, but just adultery. So that was a heated topic during this time. So when the Pharisees come to Jesus and ask him what he thinks about marriage, and they say, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause. They're asking him a very hot political question during this time, and they're hoping to trap him, because if he says something along the lines of, well, yes, it's wrong to commit adultery, which they would then view him, which is pretty much what got John the Baptist in prison whenever he questioned Herod and his wife and that whole struggle with their marriage and everything. So Jesus probably would have been thrown in prison much like John the Baptist. On the other hand, if he said it was for any cause, then there would be that side of the more liberal side to deal with. So, and here is Jesus' response. Instead of directly answering them, he says in verse 4, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." So what Jesus is saying here is, divorce is wrong, period. There should be no reason to separate what God has joined together. When a male and a female come together in marriage, that's it. There was no divorce before the fall. Whenever Adam and Eve came together and became one flesh, they were married, they were in that covenant relationship. Divorce did not exist because there was no sin, there was no reason for that. But then the Pharisees respond, "Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away?" And Jesus replies, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery." So this is a huge slap in the face to the liberal side, because what Jesus is saying is, if you divorce your wife just because she cooks you a bad meal, and you marry somebody else, you're the one who commits adultery. On the other hand, on the conservative side, sexual immorality is much broader than adultery. Under that, you can have fornication, bestiality, homosexuality, adultery. It's one of them, but there's all kinds of different sexual immorality, and there's a word for that they use, which is porneia, which is our word today for pornography. So anything that falls under that umbrella, not just adultery, but any other type of sexual sin. So for the conservative side, there's more. They're being too simple. There's more to it than just adultery. So in this case, Jesus is actually being stricter than the liberals and the conservatives. So he's saying, now, we have to be careful as well, because there's some people today who read this and say, well, if my husband or my wife cheats on me, then I have to get a divorce because that's what it says. But the thing to remember is God never condones divorce, no matter what the situation is. Instead, he would rather you have patience and forgiveness for your partner, for your spouse, whatever, and to restore or revive that relationship, rather than just simply blow it off in a divorce. Just give up on that person. But he says, Jesus is aware that there are relationships where, with a married couple, sometimes, unfortunately, that person who commits the act, there's a reason for it. And sometimes that reason is they just don't want to be with that person anymore. No matter how much that person, no matter how patient that person is, no matter how much that person forgives, that's just their choice. And so, with that, we have the choice to say, okay, if that's what you want, then so be it. But if the person who committed the act is repentant towards you, yes, it's going to hurt, but with patience and forgiveness and really just commitment to one another, then it's possible for that marriage to be restored. So divorce is always a second option. Forgiveness and patience and commitment are always first and foremost to God. So this is what Jesus' response to the Pharisees, to this really hotly debated topic during this day. He doesn't side with any of the parties. Instead, he fulfills the law by making his own and essentially making it stricter. But at the same time, it's not petty like the liberal side of it, and it's not, as constricted as the conservative side. So it's Jesus' own teaching. So anyway, that's the context. So yes, and I guess to start the discussion, whenever you read the divorce section in the Sermon on the Mount, what do you think in regards to it? Is it fair? I mean, of course it's fair that Jesus is speaking about this, but don't really know how to word this. In other words, what do you think of this teaching? Just to throw out a discussion possibility.
It's interesting that in view of where we were talking the last time with lust and the fact that Jesus is addressing the men again, and speaking about husbands to wives, again, being the head and being the protector and the one that is kind of the leader and the one that holds things together. I think that's interesting. I mean, I understand it's referring to both sides, both parties, but I think it's interesting that he's calling to that again, that responsibility, if that makes sense.
Right. Because a woman during this time, if she's a divorced woman, or if she's already been given in marriage and then divorced, the possibility of her finding a second husband is slim. Because the husband was a way for the wife to have some kind of stability, to have protection, and the only other way that she could have made money was through prostitution. That's pretty much her only outcome, or starve to death. And so Jesus is directly talking to the men again because he knows the fragile political view of women during that time. He knows that they would be forced to go into prostitution because they were essentially second-class citizens during this time. So there's actually more responsibility on the men in order to protect and sustain their wives and really commit themselves to them, but also the wives to their husband as well. There's two sides to it, but it was the husband who was, more directed than the wife was. And of course, the Pharisees always throw out these tough questions to Jesus because they're not really looking for an answer. They're looking for a way to trap him. They're looking for something that he's going to say. It's kind of like how politics are today. We ask the questions, or people ask the candidates questions or the president questions, not because they really want to hear a good answer, but because they want to trap them into something they say. And that's exactly what the Pharisees are trying to do to Jesus. But of course, instead of directly answering them, he lays out his own teachings and his own questions, and just completely, not avoids the question. He answers the question, but not in the way that they are wanting him to. Right. And if you notice, he gives these answers, and they're never, they never consider for a moment like, oh, that's a good answer. Instead, they just get angrier and find a different way to trick him.
We're expecting a real answer, Jesus.
Right. We just wanted to arrest you and possibly stone you because we don't like you. And but that's the context in what's happening and why Jesus is talking about this. Even though he is making it, he's making it even harder than it already was. But again, there's a reason for it being, because, like I said, on the liberal side, if you're a wife,
he can divorce you.
He can divorce you just for you looking at him funny. And there you go. You're a divorced woman who is forced into prostitution because you let your hair down in public.
Right.
On the conservative side, it's just strictly adultery. It's not anything else. And so that's a bit less...
in its specificity, it limits itself.
Right. So, but Jesus says sexual immorality, which is essentially just anything immoral sexually. So, he's basically saying unfaithfulness. So, then, and even then, Jesus doesn't command a divorce. He permits it. It's permittable to have a divorce on that grounds, but it's not a command. You can still work to reconcile. You can still work to commit yourselves, again, draw closer together, and really have patience and trust and love for one another. But again, people's situations are different, and so really it's up to the two persons to find out what they want to do. But again, God would rather choose reconciliation rather than separation. So
I remember the first time I ever heard not getting a divorce being an option. It seemed like groundbreaking to me. I had one of my spiritual mentors. She is part of a family of 10. She has 8 children, and she and her husband they've never had a divorce, even in the midst of their biggest struggles. And it's because before they even got married, they committed within themselves that divorce would not be an option. That we were going to work it out, that we are going to make things work no matter how much we have to fight and struggle for it. And coming from a family that's just like, if you look at our family tree, it's divorce, 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 and then there's me. And to hear that and to have that be the only thing I've ever known was groundbreaking.
mm-hmm.
That's love, is committing to not let anything come against you.
Right.
And it's one thing to remember is that whenever God puts love in your heart for somebody, love becomes a choice at that point.
Right.
Because God chooses to love us. It's why Jesus said that that even when we were in the midst of sin, God chose to love us and sent His Son for us. I don't know if it says it in those words or not, but that's the meaning I get from it. And God is our example of love, and He tells us to love like He does, and He chooses to love us. Then what right do we have not to choose to love the people that God tells us, hey, love them?
Right.
And love is hard. Like, it's hard to love people, especially whenever they mess up. But then we gotta think, hey, we mess up too, but God chose to love us. It's a hard thing, but Jesus never said it was going to be easy. He told us the opposite. Everything that's worth fighting for is going to be all-out war at some point.
I had somebody once tell me that loving someone should be as easy as breathing. I thought,
Well, it's easy to breathe. And it should be,
second nature.
It ought
But
to be.
sometimes you have to fight for it.
but that's not. And again, it is an all-out war to love, regardless of how the person treats you or how the person views you or whatever, whether the other person loves you back or not. We ought to love like we breathe. But again, there is a constant battle to do so. And the closer we draw to God, the easier it will be to love others back.
Right.
And not be hurt by anybody else, because, who cares? We're not here to seek man's approval. We're here because God has already approved us. And so, and that's how we should not only treat our spouses, but everybody in love and forgiveness and patience. And, when the Pharisees asked Jesus, they're asking this question, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? It seems like they're referring to the more liberal side, but they're using that as a trap, essentially. And what Jesus does is brilliant. He references Genesis 2:24, which is the origin of marriage, pre-fall, and there was no divorce then. But the Pharisees recognize that, and then they try to trap him again by saying, well, yeah, but we don't live during that time anymore. I'm paraphrasing. We don't live in that time anymore. Moses said that we could have a certificate of divorce and send her away. Why did he do that if divorce isn't lawful? And it's because, and Jesus' response is because of our hardness of heart. Because in the beginning it was not so. But because of our hardness of heart and our rebellion and trying to choose our own ways, regardless if it hurts anybody else, divorce was an option, but it wasn't so in the beginning. And so
It's really neat to see his plan of redemption explained there too. I feel like that's one of the moments of Jesus' ministry where he's restoring things. As he goes, he sets precedences that are, the way that they should have been. Kind of restoring to the way we were before the fall.
right.
And it's just neat to watch him walk through that and say, to say that that's not how it should have been, and now that I'm here, it doesn't have to be.
Right.
So, it's that ministry of reconciliation.
So even though it's a tough topic, divorce is a tough topic, because I know that I've known about divorce for a while in my family line as well, and it's not easy. And even though it's devastating for the two people involved, it's also devastating for the rest of the family. And it's a very sensitive topic, but the fact that Jesus talks about it is that he knows not only during that time, but this time as well, that it's harmful. It's harmful for everybody who is involved, not just the people who are getting the divorce, but it affects everyone that is close to them in a negative way. And so, because of that, Jesus must talk about it. And I think he answers it pretty well by saying that if you marry somebody and they are unfaithful to you, you shouldn't say, well, that's it, time to get a divorce automatically, but you should try to at least be patient, understand why. I think that's one of the biggest things is when you find out that somebody was unfaithful to you, the first thing you want to know is why. And then, I guess depending on their reason, you can choose to say, okay, I either forgive you, or I need more time to think, or it's just too late to save anything. But through prayer and through trusting God, you will know what to do. So divorce should always be a second option, and forgiveness and restoration should be the main priority. But that's all I have on that. It's very short section, so there wasn't as much to cover. But if anybody has anything else to add, or any
It just
questions.
frustrates me.
What? This section?
Mm-hmm.
How so?
Just because going back to what we were talking about before, I think it just eats me up that it's an option at all. I question that. And maybe that's just me operating from
Like you think
generations of it.
you think there shouldn't be a reason at all, even including
I don't think you should get married at all if that's an option. You know what I mean?
yeah.
If there's even a hint in your mind that someday you might fall into something like that,
Well, it says in
don't get married.
Yeah. In chapter 19, verse 10, the disciples actually say that. They say, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry. But he said to them, not everyone can receive the same, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive this, receive it. And even Paul goes on to say that, if one chooses to be single, then that's okay. And, so marriage isn't something that we have to do in order to be faithful to God or anything. It's not a commandment. But if we choose to do so, there is responsibility. There is commitment. And, like you said, if we aren't committed to that person, then we shouldn't marry. But you have people getting married all the time today, and known each other for a few weeks or a month, and then they get married, and it's a completely different experience, and they wind up not liking each other anymore, and there's divorce there. So, but the thing to remember is in the beginning of marriage, it was between a man and a woman, and it was a committed marriage, a committed loving marriage, and there was no divorce. But because of sin, unfortunately, there is such a thing. And so, in order to accommodate that, Jesus gives us this teaching. And if I dug even deeper into it, I would find even more answers than I know, and I could probably figure it out better. But that's all that I got.
I got a question,
Uh-huh.
but I don't know, like, you may have said something about this, and I was so, like, trying to figure it out myself that I missed it, so if you already said this, I'm sorry. But, well, read verse 32, because I have NIV, and I want to know what yours says before, because I know it was a little bit different than mine.
In chapter
Like,
5?
just 32, I want to hear what yours says.
Yeah.
Yeah, or chapter 5, yeah.
Okay. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery.
Okay, my question is, and this is just silly, like it's just a thought that came in my head, but like it says like if you divorce your wife, it makes her an adulteress. Like, why does it not say like if you divorce your wife, you're an adulteress? I mean, you know what I mean? I don't know. Like my brain directly went to like because it doesn't necessarily like it says on the grounds of marital unfaithfulness, but why does like you divorcing her
Why is it
determine it?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
It could be what he was talking about, like how they basically are going to prostitution. It could have to do with that.
Yeah. Well,
or it could be that like if you divorce them for any other reason and they end up getting married to somebody else, then that's adultery because they were meant to be married to you.
Yeah.
right.
Well,
Like,
I guess I just like why would that
why would it
why
be
would
the
they
woman?
become it? Well, that and then, but why would they become it? Because like it says that the divorce causes her to become an adulteress.
I guess
So
that
why?
that
You know what I'm saying? Like, why does the divorce? I don't know. I'm my brain's being too analytical here.
Yeah. Well, I guess if I were to give you an answer, when a husband and obviously, but when two become married, they become one flesh. So that is to say that both that is at their most intimate. So when a husband looks at his wife and says, I don't like you anymore because for whatever reason, and divorces her, well, she's already had sexual relations with her husband. So now that she's divorced and no longer a virgin, then if she marries another man, then that is adultery. Because I know.
Yeah, I know. It's just I was being too analytical anyways, but
Right.
it makes you think like, the way it's worded, like because I knew like when we read it, I was like, this is simple, but I want to know like.
Yeah.
Like, why is she not an adulteress before if there was marital unfaithfulness, like, if it was on her part, why is she not adulteress until, I don't know, my brain's working.
Yeah, I get what you're
always,
saying. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife except on the ground of sexual immorality makes her commit adultery.
Yeah, that accept. Let's talk about that. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, like
Because it seems like the way that it's being.
Without it,
She made herself.
it says that she's an adulteress. You know what I'm saying? Like, but if there was a divorce because there was sexual immorality, it would make more sense. But if there's not, why does that make her an adulteress?
32.
532.
I'm wondering if it's like who's doing the action. Like, except for on the grounds of, except for that, she's the one that's making herself an adulteress. But if the man divorces her for any other reason, he's the one who's causing that. So, but then why would it make her?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I was hoping, like, if I said that, some of our brains put together would, like, be able to figure that out. But I've never noticed it, like, when I read it, you just kind of read it as it is, but not think about what that part says, and I'm just like, I don't get it right now. But
I guess it depends on who commits the sexual immorality. Because if it's the man, then it's on him, obviously. And but with a woman, even if it wasn't sexual immorality on her part, she would still be divorced in adultery because of her relations with her former husband.
I just pulled up the verse, and I've got this app called Blue Letter Bible.
I got that.
Yeah, let's me look at the Greek, and I just pulled it up. But the word that says who divorces his wife, the word his, in the Greek, it's basically just a general pronoun. Like, it could mean himself, herself, themselves, itself, he, she, it, or the same.
Kind of like
Basically-
one word too.
Basically, like, it could be that it's talking about that anyone who divorces their spouse is an adulterer or an adulteress, or it could be just basically the context of it. I'm trying to look at the rest of it. But
It's kind of like when you're writing a paper and you say, if one were to do this, then he would blah blah blah. Or if one would do this, then she would blah blah
the
blah.
he
So
could
it's
just be
indefinite.
like talking about like mankind in general, because it says that everyone who divorces them, everyone, either individually or collectively.
So it's just whichever pronoun Jesus
Yeah.
chose to use right there, not necessarily just men.
So
Yeah, and
that
then
helps.
the word that says makes her commit adultery, the word her, the same word in Greek can either mean himself, herself, itself, or themselves. So it really is. I think it's talking about anybody who divorces their spouse, either is making them the adulterer or adulteress, or they themselves are the adulterer or adulteress. Because if you divorce your spouse on the grounds of anything other than sexual immorality, and you decide to remarry, then you're an adulterer, because you're breaking the covenant that you made with God. And if you were divorcing them, then you're making them break the covenant they made with God.
Okay. That's a man, my brain hurts.
I love this app.
Yeah. Anything else? Questions, concerns? But that's all that I wrote down. And pretty short, but still a lot of things to consider. And I was a little bit behind on my preparing for it anyway, so.
It's interesting that oaths come right afterwards.
God has a way of doing things like that, putting everything in a sequence.
Mhm. All right, well, if that's it, I'll just pray us out. And dear Heavenly Father, thank you for giving us a chance to come together and to learn more about you and worship you and have fellowship with one another, God. And I just want to pray for the family of Miss Martha as they grieve and come together and just place your hand on them, God, and comfort them through this time of loss. You, God, I pray for Faye's mom, and just give her protection and just the realization that you were there regardless of her safety, that you are the protection that she needs, and God, just provide for her with security and with your hand, God. God, I pray for all of us in here as we go about the rest of this week, God. Just give us grace, give us restoration, God, to you, and let our lives be right in your eyes, God, and help us follow you through your grace and through your love, God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you for joining us again. If you have any questions on any of the material mentioned, just drop in an email or send us a message here on YouTube. God bless and have a great night.